And this is just to briefly talk about translanguaging, because translanguaging is a process, and we're learning from research that it really can be beneficial when it's used effectively in a classroom. It's certainly what bilinguals and multilinguals do naturally in their daily lives. So we should really think carefully about ways to bring it strategically into our SIOP lesson. What you want to think about with regard to translanguaging, I'm going to give you some definitions here, is that it allows multilingual students to use their full linguistic repertoire, which may be two languages or even more. And they use this strategically to accomplish a task. So it's not like saying you can only pick from this basket of tools to do something. You have all these baskets. Let's use whatever makes most sense for the task at hand. And with this kind of translanguaging practice in the classroom, students then can apply knowledge that they've gained through any medium of language. So they may have learned something reading storybooks in Spanish at home, for example, that they can tap that knowledge. They can tap that knowledge in the classroom. Or maybe they've done an experiment in science in English and they've gained knowledge that was taught through English. That's perfectly fine. Both of those types of language-driven knowledge bases should be applied in our classrooms, and they can make more meaning building on those foundational concepts. It's really a dynamic and acid-based approach to learning. It allows both the learners and the teachers to be more effective when they're communicating in the classroom, because they use the language that makes the most sense for them, or that they are best able to articulate their ideas in. Now, I just want to show you a few graphics to share how translanguaging can actually happen in your class. What you see here is what's fairly traditional, where there's input in some ways, whether it's a teacher lecture, whether it's a textbook, this input's in English. Students are asked to process it in some way in English, and then there's some output, some way that the teacher checks that the students have done this and that they understand it, and that's in English as well. But that's not the only way it has to happen in your classroom. It could be that there's input in English, but some students get to do that processing, that activity or task in their native language. And then they use that, what they've learned through that native language processing, to create some output that's in English. And yet another way would be that they have native language input, perhaps through a supplemental reader or through a website, or just through talking with peers about something in their native language. Then they get together and they do that processing in English, and they have the English output. And you might guess there's a fourth way, which would be native language input with native language output. And that leads to, native language input with native language processing, and then it leads to English output. Now, looking at all of this, you may say, okay, I can see how that makes sense, but what about the students who are struggling with that output in English? Because particularly newcomers, depending on what the task is, that could be a challenge. Well, there's some more flexibility that I might think about. One might be adding an option of native language output. So here they are processing this information. It may come in the native language, it may be processed in the native language. They produce something that's in the native language, and you might be able to accept it at that level. Or you might push them a little further to create that output. And so what they've produced in the native language then becomes a scaffold for what they will produce in English. And at this point too, you can match up students and have partners work on things to come up with that English output if that's essential for the lesson that you're teaching. Okay,